During a recent visit to Ukraine, Senator Lindsey Graham said the following.
If you're a retired F-16 pilot and you're looking to fight for freedom, they will hire you here.
It's an interesting idea, and I've heard at least one prominent former U.S. Air Force F-16 pilot say that he'd gladly enter the fight if given the opportunity. It's not hard to see the appeal to retired fighter pilots. Those who support Ukraine, who see the fight as one of good versus evil, could bring their talents to bear and test their skills against a formidable foe. It would be a return to the glory days, the most exciting, challenging, and rewarding part of their lives, and they presumably would be well compensated for their efforts. As documented on this channel since Russia invaded Ukraine in February of 2022, the United States has been supporting the Zelensky government in its fight to repel Putin's troops. But the U.S. has not declared war on Russia. That means that any American citizens who are paid by a host government to enter the fight would not be covered by the provisions of the Geneva Convention, specifically those that are designed to protect prisoners of war. But if it did happen, it wouldn't be the first time that Americans flew as mercenary pilots. Captain Claire Lee Chenault had tried to become a pilot during World War I, but the war ended before he got his wings. Instead of dogfighting with Fokker triplanes over the trench-lined battlefields in France, he formed the U.S. Army's 3 men on a flying trapeze aerobatic team with Staff Sergeants Billy McDonald and J.H. Williams, flying Boeing P-12 biplanes that had a top speed of 194 miles per hour. Their signature move during their show was when the 3 airplanes would taxi to a stop in front of the crowd, and McDonald and Williams would jump out and tie a 20-foot rope between their P-12s and Chenault's parked between them. Once linked, they'd take off and perform loops and rolls without parting the ropes, or worse, pulling the spars off of their biplanes. The show was a huge hit with the American public. In 1937, Chenault's hearing was all but gone after 20 years of flying open cockpit airplanes for the U.S. Army Air Corps, so he disbanded the 3 men on a flying trapeze team. But among the airshow fans at their last performance was Chinese Air Force General Mao Pangzhou. China had been at war with Japan for 6 years at that point, and their nationalist leader, Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek, needed an outsider to lead and organize his country's struggling Air Force, which was performing poorly as it tried to support Chinese ground troops against the invading Imperial Japanese Army. Things looked bleak, and they were increasingly desperate to find something that might turn the tide of war in Indochina. Chenault, still driven by his desire to prove his aviation skills in combat, and not just as an airshow pilot, accepted General Pangzhou's offer and was immediately promoted to colonel in the Chinese Nationalist Air Force. Chenault moved to Kunming, the capital of China's Yunnan province, and started an effort to train young Chinese pilots who wanted to join in the defense of their country. But because of a lack of working airplanes and overall disorganization of Chiang's military, he wound up having to send many of the flight cadets back to the United States to complete their training. During the late winter of 1941, the lack of progress in creating a Chinese Air Force that could do its part to stop the Japanese advance caused Chiang to send Chenault back to the United States to lobby the FDR administration. His timing was good in that President Roosevelt himself was already looking for ways to support China against the Japanese. Chenault scored 2 big wins during his visit back to the States. First, with the help of Madame Chiang Kai-shek's brother, TV Song, who lived in Washington, D.C., Chenault was authorized to return to China with 100 Curtiss P-40B fighters that had originally been intended for Britain. And second, President Roosevelt signed a secret executive order that allowed Chenault to recruit U.S. military aviators and maintenance personnel for what they were calling the American Volunteer Group, or AVG. Chenault combed Army, Navy, and Marine bases looking for volunteers to sign a 1-year contract, telling them that when their time was up, they could go back to their old commands at their current ranks. Lured by a sense of adventure and a big pay raise, which included a bonus of $500 for every Japanese airplane, 87 pilots and 300 maintainers, 11 of whom were Chinese Americans, boarded a ship and sailed from San Francisco carrying phony American passports that listed their occupations as carpenters, sheet metal workers, musicians, electricians, stonemasons, or whatever they could come up with at the time. Meanwhile, on the other coast, a cargo ship was loaded with 99 P-40s, one less than the 100 they were supposed to get because one of them fell into the Hudson River as it was being loaded aboard a transport ship in a New York City port. In his memoir, the AVG's military chaplain describes his fellow mercenaries like this. Most men were escaping from frustrations or disappointments. They hoped an unknown future in an unknown place would somehow give them a second chance. The British Royal Air Force shared its meager facilities at the Kaido training field near Taungoo, Burma, some 170 miles north of Rangoon, and the AVG started their Warhawk fan flights along with Tactics Ground School, which was complicated by the fact that many of the mercenary pilots had lied about their flight experiences during the recruiting process. Chennault divided the aircraft into 3 squadrons. The first squadron was designated Adam and Eve, with fuselage numbers 1 to 33. The second squadron was named Panda Bears, and they got aircraft numbers 34 to 66. And the third squadron, called Hell's Angels, got the P-40s numbered 67 to 99. The younger mercenaries called Chennault the Old Man because of his leathery complexion, made so by years of wind blasts flying in open cockpits. He developed aggressive tactics that leveraged the P-40's ability to take hits and still make it back to base, and its superior diving ability. The P-40 had a huge turn rate disadvantage compared to most Japanese fighters, especially the Zero, above 25,000 feet, so the AVG's plan was never to engage that high. As they trained, crews also considered their mercenary status and talked about what would happen if they fell into enemy hands. These were the days before the Geneva Convention, so the idea of being prosecuted after the fact for war crimes wasn't a concern for the Japanese, and stories of how they tortured prisoners circulated among the squadron. They all figured if they were captured, they'd be killed, and just hoped it would happen quickly. But any concerns about their mercenary status were ultimately moot because by the time they actually saw combat, the Pearl Harbor attack had happened, and President Roosevelt had declared war on Japan. The AVG went into combat on December 8, 1941, with only 55 P-40s due to pilot mishaps in the previous months, including 3 that resulted in fatalities, and a run of thrust-bearing failures on the fighter's Allison engine. 2 weeks later, after a mission that destroyed a large number of Japanese Ki-27 fighters over Kunming, the grateful Chinese citizens in the town below gave them the nickname of Fei Hu, which in English means flying tigers. The squadron embraced the name and painted eyes and a mouth with sharp teeth on the noses of their fighters, which was instantly iconic and is used by squadrons to this day. The AVG attacked ground targets and engaged enemy aircraft throughout the China-Burma-India theater of operations. Their mission was to protect the Burma Road, a vital 600-mile-long supply line that ran through the rugged terrain between Lashio and Kunming. Putting the old man's tactics to the test day after day, they racked up impressive victories over Japanese forces. By the 24th of January 1942, the Flying Tigers had destroyed 73 Japanese aircraft while losing only 5 of their own, despite the fact they were outnumbered and faced experienced and fully trained Japanese pilots. They used Chinese scouts who were skilled in spotting incoming Japanese aircraft and relaying their presence to the AVG in time for pilots to scramble and get a jump on enemy fighters. They exploited the disadvantages of the Japanese Ki-27, the predominant fighter in that theater, which had little armament and was slow, even slower than the Ki-21 bombers it was supposed to escort. The P-40 used diving forward quarter slashing attacks and found the Ki-27s would come apart with very few hits or would self-destruct if they got going too fast while attempting to run away. In short order, the deeds of the Flying Tigers assumed legendary proportions in the American press as well as in other nations. No less than British Prime Minister Winston Churchill cabled the governor of Burma in 1942, and it read, "The victories of these Americans over the rice paddies of Burma are comparable in character, if not in scope, with those won by the Royal Air Force over the hop fields of Kent in the Battle of Britain." In nearly 7 months of intense combat, December 1941 to July 1942, the Flying Tigers shot down 296 combined enemy planes and 300 more probables. They also destroyed 573 bridges, 1,300 riverboats, and killed thousands of soldiers of the Imperial Japanese Army. Their own losses were 69 planes and 25 pilots. Also, 2 crew chiefs were killed during Japanese bombing raids at various airfields. By the time the AVG's 1-year contract was up and they were disbanded in early July of 1942, the squadron was down to 30 flyable P-40s. At that point, the Army Air Force took over the entire operation. With the stroke of a pen, the AVG became the 23rd Fighter Group. Chennault was recommissioned a brigadier general and stayed on as the group's first commander. The name Flying Tigers was later officially adopted by the 14th Air Force. Chennault ultimately rose to the rank of Major General and retired from the U.S. Army Air Force just a few weeks before the Japanese surrendered in 1945. He was not invited to the Japanese surrender ceremony aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, a slight that some military historians attribute to his reputation for being argumentative and the fact he wasn't a West Point alum and therefore not part of the Army's Old Boy network. 19 of the Flying Tigers reached ace status during the war, led by David Lee Tex Hill with 18 1/4 kills. Other notable members of the squadron include Greg Pappy Boynton, who broke his AVG contract a few months before they were disbanded to return to active duty as a Marine Corps Corsair pilot, ultimately receiving the Medal of Honor for his conduct above and beyond the call of duty while commanding the legendary Black Sheep Squadron. Well known by the American public as a cartoonist before his stint with the Flying Tigers, Alan Burt Chrisman bailed out after being hit over Rangoon and was killed after being gunned in his chute by his adversary as he descended to the ground. Robert William Prescott became the founder of the Flying Tiger Line, America's first scheduled cargo airline well before FedEx. And after the war, Flying Tiger Charles Older got his law degree using the GI Bill and rose through the judicial ranks to become a California Superior Court judge who wound up presiding over the murder trial of Charles Manson. So back to the war in Ukraine and Senator Graham's call to action. As you saw in the history of the Flying Tigers, absent FDR's declaration of war, those Americans remain as mercenaries, which means even if they believe in the cause they're part of, they lack the moral standing that comes with serving under a nation's flag. Those who've seen the face of war know it's evil enough when supported by God and country to enter into it without those things. And these days, once again, there is the practical matter of mercenaries forfeiting their protections under the Geneva Convention should they become POWs. That means that a captured American flying a Ukrainian Air Force F-16 could be tortured to his breaking point by the Russians without fear of being charged with war crimes. As the Vietnam War POWs learned, the ability to resist varies by individual, but ultimately a captor willing to commit atrocities will find the captive's breaking point. And when they do, the information provided now poses a risk to those still in the fight. And there's the non-trivial matter of presidential will. It's unlikely the current or even future president would do what FDR did and sign a secret executive order authorizing Americans to act as mercenaries. That doesn't mean there's no chance that F-16 pilots wouldn't do it. It just means that if they are, they're on their own. All right, that'll do it for this episode. Tell me your thoughts about this topic in the comments section below. And this channel is powered by subscribers, but 59% of you who regularly watch episodes aren't one. You can fix that right now by clicking the button below. I appreciate it. And in the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again very soon.